Matt Lenihan for Boxing Social in association with William Hill, Empire Fight. So I'm delighted to be joined by Showtime Stephen Espinoza for the first time in person. Stephen, mega event yesterday. There was sort of Floyd Mayweather vibes in the lobby. Huge turnout for the grand arrivals that we've seen for many years. The star power of Gervonta Davis, the presence of Ryan Garcia. This is a mega fight.
Absolutely. I mean, any metric, whether it's ticket sales, whether it's celebrity demand, whether it's social media traffic, whether it's something simple like the views of All Access, those put these up at a level that we haven't seen since the Mayweather days.
You've worked with Gervonta Davis on, since the very beginning. How do you see him as a fighter now in terms of where he was at the beginning? He's developed such a lot, especially in recent fights. Where is he in terms of levels, in terms of pound for pound? Because we often talk about, obviously, the likes of Usyk and things like that, but he's on the rise, Gervonta. Where do you see him in that list?
Well, you see, the danger when you have somebody who knocks people out as impressively as Tank is, that's what people remember. And that's what people look for and hope for. But the reality is, Tank's an underrated boxer, and I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves for being as skilled a boxer as he is. Because we've seen there's plenty of guys with power, but when power is coming, then it's harder to continue that knockout streak. So clearly, it's not news to anyone that Tank's got a lot of power. And the fact that he continues to knock people out shows that he is doing intelligent things to set that up. He's not just coming in and swinging wild. So I think, the power is what everyone, that's what sells tickets, that's what, gets views. But what actually makes him the complete fighter and makes him the threat that he is, and I think he is on the cusp of pound for pound top 10, what makes him that is sort of his underappreciated boxing skills.
I'll go along with that. What do you expect to happen on Saturday night? Obviously, Ryan Garcia, he's been calling for Tank even when he was mandatory for Devin Haney. I think a lot of people forget that when Devin was there trying to get the fight, he goes, I want Tank Davis. Mm-hmm. So what can we expect Saturday night? What do you expect to see in that ring?
Well, to be candid, like anyone who tells you they know what to expect, is lying. Because the reality is Tank has not seen anyone with the combination of height and speed and power that Ryan has. There are very few in the lighter divisions who have that combination. By the same token, Ryan has not seen the kind of power that Tank brings to the table. So this is in law you call it a case of first impression. This is something we haven't seen before. So it will. I think that's part of the intrigue and part of the interest is no one really knows until we see them actually in the ring, because there's no one on Tank's resume who approximates what Ryan does, and vice versa. You'd say, look, Mario Barrios was a tall guy, but he doesn't have the skill set and the speed of Ryan Garcia. So I think, look, that's what makes this so intriguing. I think that's the interest is. And it's sort of, going back in time, it's a little bit of Mayweather versus De La Hoya. It's sort of like, obviously the ages are different and there are plenty of other differences. But going into that, I think it was a toss-up.
You mentioned Mayweather De La Hoya. That was sort of the moment where Floyd turned into, global superstar, became the A-side in all his fights and really went on to achieve some unbelievable things. We now have this fight with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis. Do you see that as a similar sort of thing where the winner of this sort of takes the mantle, takes the throne and becomes that unequivocal sort of face of boxing?
Yeah, I think the reality is every fighter needs this kind of fight to catapult him. If you look at Floyd Mayweather, it was the De La Hoya that put him on an entirely different level. So that is absolutely it. But the one thing I would say is, in this type of fight, both fighters come out, I think, looking the better. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a competitive fight, and at the end of this, there are no losers. Of course, that's going to be hard to tell somebody, after the fight when there is a declared winner and loser. But when a fight is this big in this magnitude, both guys get bigger on behalf of it.
I was speaking to this with Joe, about this with Joe Goosen and Eric Gomez, how important it is that no matter who loses this fight that the boxing world, the media, the press, the fans, that we don't not cast them aside but think any less, because these two guys are in the 20s. You would say Gervonta is approaching his prime, if not in it now. Ryan Garcia is on the rise, young, early 20s, but he's got that star power as well. How important is it that we uplift this event, and no matter what the result, because ultimately as fight fans, we want to see these. No matter if you've got one loss on your record or two losses, if there's good fights been made and the names are there, we can do it. So how important is that?
Yeah, look, I know that for a lot of fighters, having the undefeated record is a point of pride, and
Floyd's fought a little bit.
And I would be proud too. You got to a certain point in your career without having lost. That's something to boast about. But by the same token, I do think that the boxing audience does appreciate that. That's not the end all and be all. And if you are going to want people to take challenges and take fights, then by the same token, you can't penalize them if they don't come always on the upper end of that decision. So it absolutely is. And I think with something like this, I don't think anybody gets penalized for losing a fight of this caliber.
That's good to hear. Let's talk about getting this fight made. We often hear about negotiations. You've got two big personalities, two promotional outfits, two networks. So for many people, you look and go, hurdle, 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 can we get over the line? In terms of all the fights that you've made over the years, and you've been involved with the biggest ones, how easy, difficult was this to navigate to this point?
It was one of the more complicated and difficult to navigate. That's without a doubt. I wouldn't say it was quite Mayweather-Pacquiao level, because but it was close. Candidly, it was close. I mean, Mayweather-Pacquiao, you had two competing, television networks. You had, two promotional outfits that didn't like each other. You had two fighters who didn't like each other, and you had a lot of water under the bridge. That was sort of the context and the prelude for the negotiation. A lot of those same factors are here. Certainly there's personal animosity. There's a business rivalry. There's legal challenges. There's contractual challenges. There's personality conflicts. It was all there. It was all there in the recipe for this fight to not happen. So, I think everybody deserves credit. I don't think there's one or two people who deserve more credit than anybody, because any one of the people in this process could have cratered the whole thing at any point. And at certain points, it felt like that was going to happen, but it didn't. I think it's a credit to the fighters, because I think they're the ones who really, it's their careers that's put on hold as the longer this drags out. So they're really the ones who, I think, can't really be faulted. At a certain point in the negotiations going on 4 or 5 months, these guys want to continue to get fights. So I think it wouldn't be unusual for one of them to say, look, let's go in a different direction. We saw that happen with Spence Crawford. But here, to credit, now that I've said that no one deserves more credit, if there are people you want to give more credit to, it's the two fighters. I mean, I think Ryan was probably more vocal before the negotiation and calling Tank out, but I just think that's his personality. Tank isn't a real vocal call him out. He certainly does his share of trash talking, but it's not. He's not out there calling people out every week. But in terms of keeping their eyes, on the finish line and not deviating from that goal, it was absolutely Tank and absolutely Ryan who drove the negotiation and made sure nobody left the table until a deal was done.
In terms of networks, obviously, Showtime, Gervonta Davis, PBC, they go hand in hand, they have done for years. Gervonta Davis, then these guys made no secret, look, we know who's the A side in this fight, but Ryan obviously normally fights on DAZN. Mm-hmm. Are you sort of open to this happening more in the future? Obviously Joe Markowski, DAZN and all them guys, do you think this has sort of opened the door for future fights and future negotiations? If you can work out how to work together with good fights on this side of the fence, good fights on this side of the road, could this open the door for future fights and working together a bit more?
I think so. I mean, I'm not sure that this is a blueprint, because every deal is different. But I think it signals maybe, hopefully, a new period in which people are a little bit more willing and a little bit more flexible in working together. As from our perspective, from the Showtime perspective, we've done it for years. I mean, we did it with HBO going back to Lewis Tyson. We did it again with HBO on Mayweather-Pacquiao. We did it with UFC and Mayweather-McGregor. Now, there have been other times where it didn't work out, but this is not this type of collaboration. And this sort of crossing the street or crossing the lines isn't something new to us. We've been open to it. We've done it for over 20 years. I think where I think fans can get optimistic is on the other side. And again, I don't want to point fingers, but when you're launching a new business, whether it's DAZN or somebody else, like the first thing out of the gate when you're establishing your brand is not, hey, I want to collaborate with everybody and water down my brand. So I think that's really one of the obstacles. So I think that's what makes me more optimistic is, if DAZN's gotten to a point where, it's less about we need to sort of build everything exclusively DAZN, and they're willing to be a little bit more open, which they've certainly said as much lately, then I think that does open the doors.
You talk about working together, and I know you've done it before, whether it be promoters. We see here two very, two very much like standalone promoters, and they have to put ego aside to make this happen. From across the pond, obviously, we rarely get to speak to you guys. I was saying to Lennon, we hear normally one side of the coin. Eddie Hearn, just want to touch on him. Are you open to doing business with him in the future? It seems like sort of relationships seem a bit, don't know what the word is. I don't know. I'm trying to get the word, because you see Leonard and Eddie have a back and forth all the time. I'll speak to Eddie. There'll be something about Leonard. There hasn't been much recently, but obviously I know he's been brought up to Leonard. How is the relationship with Eddie, and are you open to working with him? Obviously, if business is right, but if things get better in the future.
Yeah. Look, the relationship. I don't know that there is one right now. To be completely honest, we haven't spoken since I don't know when. There's been certainly plenty of opportunities where we could have done business. He prefers to go directly to the fighter, which hasn't worked out very well for him. Rather than, pursuing the kind of negotiation that ended up with this event, he just, his strategy in the past has been, let me text the fighter directly, let me email the fighter directly.
So this is more of a procedure where you're saying, you instead of going to the fighter, you come to me, you go to the top, and then we go from there and work it out with the fighters after, rather than doing it that route?
Well, look, he certainly, he's a grown man. He can use whatever strategy he wants. I think you can look at the results and say that it hasn't worked very well, because certainly 99% of the fighters that he pursued by texting and DMing, haven't gone anywhere. So the reality is, okay, maybe it's time for a different strategy, and maybe instead of trying to make an enemy of everyone and coming in and announcing that I have $1 billion and I'm going to take over the industry and everyone's out of business, and by the way, your business model sucks, maybe a little bit more collegialism, a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more of sort of a negotiating tactic instead of sort of a scorched earth. Now, the reality is, at this point, he has no choice but to change tactic. He doesn't have the $1 billion anymore. There is no scorched earth, and all of a sudden, DAZN is open to working with other promoters, and the reality, the world is changing. So, look, I'm sure he will adjust accordingly. Not everything that he does can go to the Middle East. I'm sure he wants to do some things occasionally in the UK, occasionally in the US once in a while, certainly more than he's been doing. And if he'd like to do that, sure, the door is open. I don't have to be best friends with anybody. I don't.
Business.
Yeah, and absolutely. And there isn't really any grudge held. If there's a business opportunity, I wasn't best friends with Joe Markowski. I'm not sure that we're going to be having dinner anytime soon. But I've spoken to him today. I've spoken to him a few days ago, and we're doing what will be a very successful event. So the reality is, there's plenty of opportunities to go forward, and whether it's with Eddie or Joe or anybody else, we're open to it.
Well, that's always good news to hear. Finally, I've just heard recently Rolly Romero's opponent, Puello, has he failed a test, and where does that fight stand as we speak?
He did, unfortunately, test positive. I don't have a lot of details, and certainly haven't spoken to the fighter and getting his side of the story, but the test did come back positive. We're very close to securing a replacement to keep the fight and the card intact, or at least Rolly in there, which hopefully will be a title fight, nonetheless, with someone of sufficient caliber to make it a title fight.
How disappointing is it now we're seeing it, don't just mean this side of the pond, where fighters are failing tests, whether it be trace amounts, which I hear used quite often. Something we need to sort out in the sport. All these governing bodies need to get together, especially from our side of the pond. We have UCAD, and then over here you have VADA. Surely we need to be all off the same hymn sheet, get the same list of what's allowed, what's not allowed, and move on with the sport. Do you think that's ever going to be possible?
I think it needs to be possible if the sport is going to flourish, because there's all the issues that you identify, and there's also sort of a disclosure issue, and that's been, certainly from afar, one of the challenges with recent situations, whether it's Dillian White or whether it's Conor Benn or other situations, and even the Amir Khan situation, there seems to be some confusion about who knew what and when. And I think that's one of the issues. I mean, it's a safety issue. Everybody should know with their eyes open. It's happened to us. We go back 10 years, and there are fighters that we've had who looked at it and found out their opponent tested positive and said they want to go forward with the fight anyway. And if that's the case, that's fine, but that's made with full disclosure. You shouldn't be going into a fight not knowing that your opponent has tested positive before the fight.
Or even having the fight in majority of cases, I would imagine. Finally, last one from me. Crawford Spence, a lot of rumours this fight could be announced this weekend. I know you're going to get asked this a million times. So, for what you can tell me, how hopeful are you we see that fight and we won't get it past its sell by date?
I am optimistic that it happens. I'm not sure I'm ready to say that there's anything to be announced this weekend. I would say the thing that makes me optimistic is there are still ongoing discussions, and there have been discussions. There was a sort of a break in the discussions after things fell apart. Terence took another fight. Errol had another fight scheduled, and then that got canceled. And then more recently, the last few weeks, the last couple of months, there have been active discussions again. So I think that's a good thing. It's slow progress, but progress is being made. So I'm optimistic. I don't have a date or a timetable yet, but I would say
this year?
I would say no, definitely this year if it happens in this year. And I'd say it's more likely than not that we will get that fight.
Well, that's good news for everyone. Look, Stephen, I appreciate you in Boxing Social some of your time. Hopefully we can catch up after this fight, mega weekend here in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. Good to see you.